The world doesn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ends with the pathetic pfft of a pilot light going out. 1 minute, the 6-burner commercial range, my glorious stainless steel beast of an appliance, was humming along, preheating for a final systems check. The next, silence. A profound, unnerving quiet that felt heavier than any noise. The blue flames dancing in the oven winked out. The pilot lights on the griddle and burners sputtered and died, one by one, like tiny soldiers falling on a silent battlefield. My brand new, ludicrously expensive digital oven, the crown jewel of my garage, flashed a single insulting message in stark red letters: gas inlet pressure low. My mind, conditioned by years of genuine life-or-death emergencies, snapped into diagnostic mode. System failure? Unlikely. Everything was new. Internal leak? Possible. But my state-of-the-art sensors would be screaming at me right now. And the air was clean, free of that rotten egg smell of mercaptan. External line rupture? No, the whole neighborhood would be cordoned off. That left one possibility. One so absurd, so monumentally petty, that it felt like a plot point from a terrible sitcom. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the workbench and strode out of the garage, the automatic door humming open into the humid suburban night. The air in Whispering Willows was always still, thick with the scent of freshly mown grass and existential despair. I followed the path of the buried gas line, its route as familiar to me as the back of my own hand, my flashlight beam cutting a sharp cone through the darkness. There, next to the street, was the gas meter. And on the gas meter was the main shutoff valve. And hanging from the valve, secured with a goddamn hot pink zip tie, was a pristinely laminated piece of paper. I knelt, the damp grass soaking through the knee of my jeans. The beam of my flashlight illuminated the text, typed in that universally smug font, Times New Roman, size 12. It was an official letterhead from the Whispering Willows Homeowners Association. Violation notice #207. Property, 12 Elm Street. Violation, Section 8, Paragraph 4. Unauthorized utility connection and operation of commercial-grade equipment. Action taken. Per emergency powers granted to the Architectural Control Committee under Section 15, gas service has been temporarily suspended to mitigate potential safety risks. Service will be restored pending a full review and compliance hearing. Issued by Brenda Lancaster, President, Whispering Willows, HOA. I stared at it. I read it again, then a third time. My brain, a machine built to process complex logistical nightmares involving earthquakes, hurricanes, and the occasional hostile militia, simply refused to compute the data. She had actually done it. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a strongly worded letter. This was a felony. A bona fide, go-to-jail, do-not-pass-go felony, committed with the bureaucratic righteousness of someone writing a parking ticket. And she'd laminated it. The sheer, unadulterated Karen urgy of laminating a criminal threat was breathtaking. A slow, cold fury began to bubble in my gut, quickly followed by something else entirely. A familiar, exhilarating calm. The kind of calm you only find in the eye of a hurricane, or in this case, a storm of staggering suburban stupidity. My life's work had been about solving impossible problems under insane pressure. Brenda had just presented me with a very, very stupid problem, and I was about to solve it with extreme prejudice. I looked at my watch. 11:56 p.m. The big neighborhood BBQ, my grand opening for the Community Emergency Response Kitchen, was tomorrow. A massive storm was rolling in. My chance to prove this whole venture wasn't just some crazy hobby was on the line, and Brenda thought she could stop me with a wrench and a laminator. I smiled in the darkness. "Okay, Brenda," I whispered to the empty, beige street. "You want to play hardball? Let's see how you handle a professional. Record scratch, freeze frame. Yeah, that's me. The guy kneeling in the dark, contemplating federal crimes and laminated paper. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. To be honest, most days, so am I. 6 months ago, I was in a dusty, sun-baked corner of the world, negotiating with a man who had 2 gold-plated AK-47s mounted on the wall behind him, arguing over the import tariffs on 50,000 doses of cholera vaccine. My name is Leo, and for 15 years, my job was disaster logistics. When a tsunami hit, a volcano blew, or a country spiraled into chaos, I was the guy on the ground making sure the food, water, and medicine got from point A to point B without being stolen, sold, or stuck in customs for 6 months. It was a life of high stakes, constant adrenaline, and logistical puzzles that would make a chess grandmaster weep. I lived out of a go bag. My passport had more stamps than a post office, and my list of emergency contacts included pilots, warlords, and one very grumpy shipping magnate in Greece. And I was burned out, fried, cooked to a crisp. The final straw was a particularly nasty hurricane season in the Caribbean. After 3 straight months of sleeping on cots, eating protein bars, and witnessing enough human misery to last a lifetime, I had an epiphany. It happened while I was watching a forklift load a pallet of emergency blankets onto a cargo plane. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had slept in a real bed for more than 2 consecutive nights. I couldn't remember what it felt like to be bored. So, I quit. I cashed out my savings, sold my cramped city apartment, and went looking for the complete opposite of my entire adult life. I wanted boring. I craved mundane. I yearned for a life so profoundly uneventful that the highlight of my week would be taking the trash out. I found Whispering Willows. It was perfect. A sprawling suburbia of identical 2-story houses, aggressively green lawns, and a level of enforced conformity that was almost beautiful in its soullessness. The beige-on-beige color palette was soothing. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of lawnmowers and the cheerful chime of an ice cream truck. This, I thought, was where my adrenaline-ravaged nervous system could finally come to die. For the first month, it was bliss. I assembled IKEA furniture. I learned the subtle art of sprinkler maintenance. I had long, rambling conversations with a garden gnome I named Bartholomew. But then, the old instincts began to twitch. I'd watch my neighbors, nice people mostly, accountants, dentists, middle managers, but they were fragile, utterly, terrifyingly fragile. A 24-hour power outage caused by a summer thunderstorm was treated like the apocalypse. The grocery store running out of oat milk was a crisis. They had no idea how to function if the delicate web of modern convenience was even slightly disturbed. My disaster response brain saw a vulnerability, a gap in the defenses, and it itched. I needed a project. I needed a mission. That's how the Community Emergency Response Kitchen, the CERC, was born. My house had a massive, pointless 3-car garage that I was only using to store a lawnmower and Bartholomew's seasonal outfits. It was the perfect space. I'd use my own money to outfit it with commercial-grade equipment, a big range, convection ovens, industrial refrigerators, proper sanitation stations. It would be a non-profit, volunteer-run asset for the whole community. If a blizzard knocked out power for a week, or a storm flooded the main roads, the CERC would be there, churning out hot coffee, soup, and chili for anyone who needed it. It was my therapy, a way to use my old skills for a new, peaceful purpose. A bridge between the man I was and the man I was trying to become. It was also, apparently, a declaration of war. My first inkling of trouble came in the form of a recycling bin. I had rolled it to the curb on Tuesday night, as is tradition in these lands. The truck came at 8:23 a.m. on Wednesday. At 9:01 a.m., I went to retrieve the empty bin. When I got back to my front door, it was there. The first notice. Laminated, of course. It was stuck to my door with a piece of tape so strong it threatened to take the paint with it. It informed me I was in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 7, Refuse Receptacles, which clearly stated that all bins must be removed from public view no later than 9 a.m. on collection day. I had missed the deadline by 1 minute. 1 minute. I looked across the street. A woman with a severe blonde bob and the posture of a hawk spotting a field mouse was standing on her porch, holding a coffee mug like a trophy. She gave me a tight, triumphant little smile and a small wave. I had just met Brenda Lancaster, president of the Whispering Willows HOA. I should have run then. I should have packed up Bartholomew, put the house on the market, and moved to a cabin in the woods with no neighbors for 100 miles. Instead, I just waved back, a bemused smile on my face. How could I have known that this woman, armed with a 3-ring binder and an ocean of free time, would become a more formidable adversary than any gun-toting militia commander I'd ever faced? The bin incident was just the opening shot. The real war began the day the first truck arrived. I'd hired a contractor, a guy named Sal, who looked like he'd been carved out of granite and smoked for 60 years. He had a gruff demeanor, a vocabulary that was 70% swear words, and the most honest eyes I'd ever seen. I walked him through my plans for the garage. He chewed on an unlit cigar, his gaze sweeping over the empty space. "Let me get this straight," he grumbled, his voice like gravel in a blender. "You want to put a commercial-grade kitchen, a whole damn restaurant set up in your garage, in this neighborhood?" "That's the plan," I said cheerfully. "And you're not selling nothing? No secret pizza joint? No underground cupcake cartel?" "Nope, strictly non-profit, for emergencies." He stared at me for a long, silent moment. "So, you're building a soup kitchen for the end of the world in a neighborhood where the biggest disaster is 2-for-1 mimosas getting canceled at the country club." "You get it," I said with a grin. He finally let out a short, sharp laugh. "Kid, you're nuts! I like it. When do we start?" Sal and his crew were professionals. They were clean, efficient, and knew their stuff. The first day, they started by cutting into the concrete floor to lay the new plumbing drains. The sound of the concrete saw was, admittedly, not quiet. It took exactly 45 minutes for Brenda to appear. She didn't walk so much as march across the street, her sensible walking shoes thudding on the pavement. She held a clipboard to her chest like a ballistic shield. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Sal, a man who had likely been yelled at by the best, simply turned off the saw and gave her a look of profound boredom. "Yeah?" "I am Brenda Lancaster, president of the Homeowners Association," she announced, as if she were declaring her royal titles. "I need to see your permits for this industrial excavation." Sal just pointed a thumb at me. "Talk to the boss." I ambled over, wiping my hands on a rag. "Brenda, good morning. Can I help you?" "Leo," she said, her smile as thin and brittle as a wafer. "I see your project has begun. I trust you've submitted the required architectural modification plans to the committee? And the noise variance permit? And the commercial activity waiver?" She was just throwing words out there. Bureaucratic chaff. I gave her my most serene smile. "Brenda, I have all the city-issued permits right here, since the modifications are all internal to the garage and don't affect the outward appearance of the house. It doesn't actually fall under the HOA's architectural purview per Section 7. And, as it's a non-profit volunteer activity, the commercial clauses don't apply." I checked. I had done my homework. I had read the entire HOA covenant, all 128 pages of mind-numbing legalese. I knew my rights better than she did. This was a fatal error on my part. I thought I was de-escalating with logic. What I was actually doing was challenging her authority in her own domain. It was like telling a shark it was bad at swimming. Her smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she hissed, before turning on her heel and marching back to her beige fortress across the street. The next day, the second notice arrived. This one, also laminated, was for running an illegal commercial business. I responded with a meticulously polite email, CCing the entire, mostly invisible, HOA board. I attached the city permits, the articles of incorporation for my nonprofit, and the relevant sections of both the city code and the HOA's own bylaws. I ended it with, "I hope this clears up any confusion. Looking forward to making Whispering Willows a safer and more prepared community for all of us." I hit send and felt a smug sense of satisfaction. Checkmate? Or so I thought. I had just played checkers against a master of psychological warfare. Thwarted by official channels, Brenda went underground. She began her whisper campaign. It started subtly. A neighbor I'd previously shared pleasantries with suddenly wouldn't make eye contact. Another, watering her prize-winning hydrangeas, gave me a look of pure terror and scurried inside as I walked by. Sal was my man on the inside. His crew picked up the neighborhood chatter. "So, get this," he said to me during a lunch break, leaning against a newly framed wall. "My plumber Jimmy was talking to the guy at number 18. Apparently you're building a halfway house kitchen, and Brenda's telling everyone it's going to attract vagrants." "Vagrants?" I asked, choking on my sandwich. "In Whispering Willows. The only vagrants here are the deer that eat her petunias." "It gets better," Sal continued, clearly enjoying this. "She told Mrs. Gable at number 22 that you're storing industrial quantities of explosive gas, and that the whole block is a ticking time bomb." "It's a standard natural gas line," I exclaimed. "The same one she uses for her water heater." "Logic has no place here, kid. This is the suburbs." He took a bite of his own sandwich. "Oh, and my favorite one. She told the book club that you're an ex-con who learned to cook in prison." "Ex-con? I've never even had a speeding ticket." Sal shrugged. "It's a better story." The paranoia escalated. One afternoon, I saw Brenda driving past my house at approximately 2 miles per hour, her iPad held up to the passenger window, blatantly filming Sal's crew as they installed the ventilation hood. Sal just waved at her. His guys started posing, flexing their muscles and making faces. Brenda sped off in a huff. "She's trying to build a case," Sal explained later. "Documentation, evidence. She thinks if she gets enough pictures of us drinking coffee, she can prove we're loafing on the job and you're running some kind of scam." The project continued. A beacon of rational construction in a sea of madness. The walls went up, the floors were epoxied, and the beautiful stainless steel appliances began to arrive. Each delivery truck was met with a new, increasingly unhinged violation notice from Brenda. Improper commercial vehicle parking. Unsecured loading-unloading zone. My personal favorite was aesthetic nuisance, excessive cardboard. She was literally citing me for the boxes my appliances came in. For each notice, I sent a polite, factual email debunking her claims, citing the bylaws, and maintaining a tone of infuriating cheerfulness. I was creating a paper trail of her harassment, a digital fortress of reason against her laminated assaults. I knew things were coming to a head when she finally played her trump card. I was inside, discussing the final wiring for the walk-in refrigerator with Sal, when we heard a car door slam. We looked out the garage door to see Brenda, standing on the sidewalk, phone to her ear, pointing dramatically at my house. Sal sighed and took off his safety glasses. "And here we go," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "She's calling the cops." "On what grounds?" I asked, bewildered. "Doesn't matter," Sal said, rubbing his temples. "In places like this, the call is the punishment." Sure enough, 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled silently up to the curb. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a mustache that had seen things, and a general air of being 10 minutes from retirement. The other was young, eager, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy posture. Brenda stood on her lawn across the street, arms crossed, a look of profound vindication on her face. This was it, the public shaming, the official validation of all her warnings. The authorities were here to shut down the ex-con's dangerous vagrant kitchen. I met them at the end of my driveway. "Gentlemen?" I said, offering a calm smile. "Let me guess. Report of a dangerous, unpermitted gas line installation?" The older cop, whose name tag read Dave, raised an eyebrow. "You psychic?" "Just experienced," I replied. "Brenda?" "The lady across the street, yes," Officer Dave sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had responded to 1,000 calls about loud music, fallen leaves, and improperly placed garden gnomes. "She seems to think you're building a bomb in your garage." "It's a charity kitchen, actually. Would you like a tour? I can show you the permits." "We'd love a tour," the younger officer chirped, his hand hovering near his belt. I led them into the garage. Sal gave them a gruff nod. The space was a symphony of stainless steel and professional-grade order. Everything was clean, organized, and bolted down. "So," I began, launching into my presentation mode. "This is the Community Emergency Response Kitchen. As you can see, all equipment is NSF rated. The gas line was installed by a licensed and bonded plumber. There's Sal's license on the wall. All city permits for plumbing and electrical are in this binder right here, approved and signed." I opened the binder and showed them the paperwork. The younger cop looked impressed. Dave just looked tired. "The main range has a built-in fire suppression system, as does the deep fryer station. We have 3 Class K fire extinguishers, as you can see, mounted there, and there. Everything is up to, and in most cases, exceeds municipal health and safety codes." I was proud of my work. This was my element. Dave walked around, peering at the shiny equipment. "So, you're building this whole setup just in case?" he asked, the skepticism clear in his voice. "In my old job, just in case was the best-case scenario," I said. "Here, it's a hobby, a very well-regulated hobby." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the professional layout. He then walked to the open garage door and looked across the street at Brenda, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. He keyed his shoulder mic. "Yeah, dispatch," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet street. "Code 4. Situation is a surprisingly well-regulated charity kitchen. No illegal activity. The only hazard here is a potential overdose of community spirit." I saw Brenda's shoulders slump. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated, cinematic joy. The younger cop stifled a laugh. Dave turned back to me. "Look, Mr. Leo." "Leo, everything here looks fine. Better than fine, actually. But we've had 3 calls from that address about you in the last week. It's bordering on misuse of emergency services. We're going to go have a chat with her. But just so you know, you're on our radar now. Try to keep the overwhelming preparedness to a low roar, okay?" "Will do, officer," I said. "Thanks for stopping by." They left, and I watched as the 2 officers crossed the street to have a very long, and from the looks of Brenda's furious gesticulations, a very unpleasant conversation with her. Sal clapped me on the shoulder. "You, my friend," he said with a grin, "are a master of polite warfare. You killed her with paperwork." I should have felt victorious. I had won. The law was on my side. But as I watched Brenda argue with the cops, her face contorted in a mask of righteous fury, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a sense of dread. I hadn't checkmated her. I had cornered her, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I had taken away her official weapons, the bylaws, the notices, the police. Now she would have to find another way. The kitchen was finally finished the following Thursday. It was beautiful. A gleaming testament to my particular brand of functional paranoia. To celebrate, and in a final, perhaps misguided attempt to win over the neighborhood, I planned a grand opening, a maiden voyage BBQ for Saturday afternoon. Free burgers, hot dogs, and my famous 5-alarm chili. I put professionally printed flyers in every mailbox, including Brenda's. I even got the local news to agree to come. Their Community Focus segment loved the idea of the volunteer emergency kitchen, a feel-good story to end the Friday evening broadcast. Then, on Wednesday, the universe decided to raise the stakes. The weather forecast, which had predicted a sunny weekend, suddenly turned apocalyptic. A massive, unseasonable storm front was barreling towards us. They were predicting gale-force winds, torrential rain, and, the magic words, widespread multi-day power outages. My little PR stunt was about to become a live fire exercise. My phone started buzzing. Neighbors who had previously ignored me were now calling. "Hey, Leo, about that kitchen of yours? If the power goes out, will you really be open?" The tide was turning. Fear, it turns out, is a more powerful motivator than free food. Brenda must have seen it too. The news truck doing a preliminary drive-by. The neighbors suddenly treating me with a new, vested interest respect. Her authority, the only thing that gave her life meaning, was not just crumbling. It was being transferred to me. The BBQ, covered by the news, in the middle of a genuine emergency, would make me a local hero. It would be her ultimate defeat. And that, I realized later, is what pushed her over the edge. It was Friday night, the night before the BBQ. The storm was due to hit in the early hours of the morning. I was in the cirque doing one last inventory when the world went silent, when the flames died, when the red letters on my oven told me I had no gas, when I knelt by the meter and saw her laminated declaration of war. My first call wasn't to the gas company. Calling them would be admitting defeat. Their emergency line would be swamped ahead of the storm, and a service call for a non-essential issue like mine would be triaged to the bottom of the list. It could take hours, maybe even a full day. The BBQ would be canceled. The news crew would leave. My chance to prove the kitchen's worth during the storm would be gone. Brenda would win. No, I wasn't calling for rescue. I was calling to report a crime. I dialed the police non-emergency number. "Yes, hello?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "My name is Leo. I live at 12 Elm Street. I need to report a felony in progress. Someone has illegally tampered with my natural gas main. However, I have a first responder certification in emergency utility management, so I am enacting a standard bypass protocol to mitigate the immediate danger. I just wanted to notify you that I am doing so, and that I have video evidence of the crime. I will secure the scene and wait for an officer to arrive to take my report." The dispatcher was silent for a moment. Sir, can you repeat that?" I did, slowly and clearly. I was building my case, establishing a timeline, creating an official record of my actions before I took them. Then, I hung up and went to my go bag. It was the same bag I'd lived out of for 15 years. Tucked inside a canvas pouch was the toolkit that had saved my bacon from Haiti to the Philippines. And inside that kit was my secret weapon, an emergency natural gas bypass manifold. It's a specialized piece of equipment, basically a series of valves and connectors that allows a trained user to tap into a gas meter's secondary service port, creating a new, temporary pathway for the gas to flow. It's designed for disaster situations, when the main valve might be damaged or inaccessible. It's also not something your average civilian has lying around. I looked at my watch. The clock was ticking. I could almost hear the theme music from a spy movie playing in my head. This was it. The culmination of my old life and my new one. Time to go to work. Minute 1. Acquisition and assessment. I strode back to the meter, go bag in hand. The laminated notice was still there, flapping slightly in the pre-storm breeze, a monument to petty tyranny. I pulled out my phone and switched on the video recorder, with the timestamp function clearly visible. "This is Leo," I said, narrating for my future audience of police officers and gas company lawyers. Time is 11:59 p.m. I am at my residence at 12 Elm Street. I am documenting the illegal and unauthorized shutoff of my gas main. I zoomed in on the valve, the lock Brenda must have used, and her little love note. As you can see, the main valve has been turned to the off position and illegally secured. This constitutes a felony, tampering with a public utility. Minute 2, the bypass. I didn't touch the main valve. That was a crucial point. I was not reversing her illegal act. I was circumventing it with a legitimate, protocol-based solution. I knelt and attached the bypass manifold to the meter's secondary service port, a small, capped nozzle used by technicians for testing. It was like finding a secret door. I worked with practiced efficiency. My hands knew these fittings by heart. The wrench turned smoothly, the connectors seated with a satisfying click. I attached my own handheld pressure gauge to the manifold. Connecting emergency bypass manifold to the PT2 service port, I continued to narrate. This is a non-invasive procedure to restore gas flow for emergency operations, as per my Disaster Relief Operator Certification, number 77B Alpha. I even held up my laminated, I appreciated the irony, certification card to the camera. Minute 3, activation and documentation. With the manifold secure, I slowly, carefully opened its valve. I watched the pressure gauge. The needle jumped, then settled at a perfect 0.5 psi, the ideal residential pressure. The gas was flowing again, not through the main line Brenda had closed, but through my own private, legally defensible detour. "Bypass complete," I said to my phone's camera. "Gas pressure is stable and within normal operating parameters. The kitchen is now back online. I am securing the equipment and will now await the authorities." I did a final, slow pan of the entire setup. The shutoff main, the notice, and my beautifully elegant bypass running parallel to it. I stopped recording. The entire video file was 3 minutes and 48 seconds long. Minute 4, savoring the moment. I stood up, dusting off my hands. A grin spread across my face, wide and genuine. I walked back into my garage, where the air was no longer silent. It was filled with the gentle, reassuring hiss of flowing natural gas. I walked over to the range and clicked the igniter. A perfect blue ring of flame roared to life. I did the same for the oven. The red warning on the digital display vanished. "Game on, Brenda." The next morning, the world was gray and wet. The storm had rolled in around 3 a.m., and a steady, miserable drizzle was falling from a bruised-looking sky. But inside my garage, it was warm and bright, and smelled of brewing coffee and frying bacon. I had started early. By 8 a.m., I had a dozen neighbors huddled in the cirque, sipping hot coffee from styrofoam cups, their homes dark and cold from a localized power outage that had swept through our section of the neighborhood. The atmosphere was one of camaraderie and gratitude. My strange hobby was suddenly the most popular thing on the block. Around 8:30, a familiar car crawled down the street. It was Brenda. She had her game face on, a smug smirk plastered across her lips. She was here for her victory lap, to see my canceled BBQ, my dark kitchen, my public failure. Instead, she saw a party. She saw the news van parked at the curb, the cameraman filming happy neighbors eating bacon. She saw me, wearing an apron, flipping pancakes on a griddle she knew shouldn't be working. Her smirk faltered. Confusion, then rage, flooded her face. She parked her car, diagonally, taking up 2 spots, and stormed onto my driveway, her iPad held up like a weapon. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the pleasant murmur of conversation. "How is this possible? I shut you down!" She said it, out loud, in front of 20 witnesses and a rolling news camera. It was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. I turned from the griddle, holding a spatula. "Brenda, good morning," I said cheerfully. "Pancake? They're buttermilk. I have to warn you, though, you just confessed to a felony in front of a police informant, that would be me, and a news crew. Not your smartest move." "I didn't. You can't. I suspended your service," she sputtered, her face turning a fascinating shade of blotchy red. It was an official HOA action. "Was it now?" I said, leaning on the counter. "Because tampering with a gas main is a federal offense, last I checked. I, on the other hand, simply implemented a standard emergency bypass as per my disaster response certification, all perfectly documented." I gestured with my spatula to the crowd. "But please, tell us more about your official HOA action. The camera is right over there." The cameraman, to his eternal credit, smoothly panned to get a perfect close-up of Brenda's face at that exact moment. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and dawning horror. Just then, 2 vehicles pulled up to the curb. One was Officer Dave's cruiser, the other was a pristine white van from the gas company. Officer Dave ambled up the driveway, a thermos in his hand. He looked at me, at Brenda, at the news camera, and took a long, slow sip. "Leo," he said with a weary nod. "Having a party?" "Just feeding the neighborhood, Dave," I said. "Brenda here was just about to explain her volunteer work for the Architectural Control Committee." A man in a blue jumpsuit got out of the gas company van. He had a clipboard and the profoundly tired look of someone who gets called out to deal with idiots on a regular basis. This was Gary, the final arbiter. "Got a call about a line tamper and an unauthorized bypass?" he said, looking at me. "That's us," I confirmed. "The tamperer is right there." I pointed at Brenda with my spatula. "The bypass is my work. Come on, I'll show you." I led Gary and Officer Dave to the side of the house, with Brenda and the news camera trailing behind like vultures. I felt like I was leading a tour of my own masterpiece. "Okay," I said, pointing. "Here we have the main shut-off valve, illegally closed and secured with a third-party lock. And here," I pointed to my manifold, "is the emergency bypass I installed on the secondary port, restoring service. Pressure is holding steady at 0.5 psi. Gary, the gas tech, knelt. He examined Brenda's handiwork, then my own. He looked at the laminated notice, still zip-tied to the pipe, and actually snorted. He ran his fingers over my bypass fittings. He stood up, took a deep breath, and delivered his verdict. "Well," he said, looking first at me, then at Dave. "The homeowner's bypass is unconventional for a residential setting, but it's technically sound, correctly installed, and not damaging the meter. Given the circumstances he described on the phone, the storm, the community kitchen thing, and his credentials, I can't fault it. It's by the book, even if it's a book most people don't have." He then turned to Brenda. His expression hardened. "Shutting off the main valve, however," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "and attaching your own lock? Ma'am, that is a Class D felony in this state. You endangered this entire block. If there had been a leak anywhere down the line from an extinguished pilot light, you could have filled this house with uncombusted gas. You're lucky you didn't blow up the neighborhood." Brenda went pale. "But the bylaws—" "I'm the HOA president." Officer Dave finally spoke up. "Ma'am, an HOA bylaw does not supersede state and federal law. You are not a utility provider, and you are not a law enforcement officer." He pulled out a notebook. I've already got your warning for misuse of 911 on file. Now I've got a dozen witnesses, a news camera, and a utility expert all confirming you committed a felony. So, I'm going to need you to come with me." Brenda's collapse was spectacular. It was a full-scale meltdown, a supernova of sputtering rage and victimhood. She shrieked about her authority, about property values, about my illegal prison kitchen. The neighbors just stared, their pancake-filled hands frozen in mid-air. The camera kept rolling. The aftermath was swift and beautiful. The story that aired on the 5 o'clock news was not the fluffy, community hero piece I had expected. It was better. It was a hard-hitting investigative report on the dangers of overzealous HOAs, with Brenda's driveway meltdown as the star footage. An emergency HOA meeting was called that Sunday. Brenda was voted out as president in a landslide vote of no confidence. She was also facing a mountain of fines from the gas company and actual criminal charges from the DA's office. She put her house on the market a week later. The storm did get worse that night. Much worse. Power was out for almost 48 hours. And through it all, the community emergency response kitchen was a beacon. The garage door was open, the lights were on thanks to a generator, and the air was thick with the smell of chili and fresh bread. I went through 10 pounds of coffee, 50 pounds of ground beef, and I don't even know how many pancake mix boxes. Sal came by with his whole crew to help serve. Officer Dave stopped in for a bowl of chili at the end of his shift. My neighbors, the same people who had looked at me with suspicion a week ago, were now working side by side, chopping onions, washing dishes, and treating the cirque like it was their own. Late on the second night, with the rain finally tapering off, I was standing by the big range, stirring a massive pot of chili, when Sal clapped me on the back. "You know, kid," he said, a rare smile on his face, "for a guy who wanted a quiet life, you sure know how to make a lot of noise." I looked around at the scene. The warm light spilling out into the dark, wet street. The hum of conversation and laughter. The sight of people coming together, helping each other. It wasn't the quiet I had been looking for. It was something better. It was purpose. "Yeah, well," I said, grabbing a ladle. "I came here looking for peace and quiet. Instead, I found a new kind of disaster zone, one with better landscaping and more passive-aggressive notes." I grinned. "And you know what? It turns out I'm pretty good at managing both." I held out a steaming bowl of chili. "Now, who wants seconds?"